Benson and the greatest American hero won't be seen tonight.
I don't believe it.
But they'll return soon. Now stay tuned for the following special presentation.
We first encountered them 1,000 of your Earth years ago. It was a golden age. Our Martian civilization was at the height of its peace and prosperity. And then, they arrived. Where they came from, no one knew, but they were determined to make our planet their own. We Martians were peaceful people, and the taking of any life was abhorrent to us, but we quickly learned the ways of war. For centuries, the battles raged on. Every trace of our once great civilization was obliterated. We fought valiantly, but the invaders were parasites who fed on our psychic energy. As we grew weaker, they grew stronger. They even absorbed our shape-changing abilities. Finally, a small group of Martian survivors planned one final, desperate attack. Inside their underground stronghold, we unleashed a powerful nerve gas which paralyzed them. The attack was successful, but the cost was dear. I was the only survivor, the last of my kind.
I sought refuge on your planet because my own world had none of the freedoms that you take for granted. I vowed to protect those rights, so I scoured the Earth in search of those whose gifts could help me fulfill that dream. I'm John Jones, leader of the Justice League.
I'm Mars' sole survivor. There's a reason for that.
Martian Manhunter 60th Anniversary, a celebration of the Alien Atlas, with Diabolu Frank, featuring new conversations with J. Mark DeMatteis, Howard Chaykin, Peter David, Mike McCone, and Carlo Barbieri, as well as archival footage and text-to-audio dramatizations with a who's who of the friends of the sleuth from outer space.
I'm so sorry. All I wanted was to send a signal to Mars. How could I have known it would teleport you here? I suppose we both got the shock of our lives, but your heart must be stronger than mine. Whoever you are, forgive me.
In his 1995 book, DC Comics, 60 Years of the World's Favorite Comic Book Heroes, Les Daniels wrote, "Perhaps the most significant science fiction hero of the era didn't appear in the sci-fi comic books at all. He was John Jones, Manhunter from Mars, and he arrived in Detective Comics number 225, November 1955. An alien transported to Earth by an aged scientist who inconveniently died and left him stuck. He took the secret identity of John Jones and became a police detective who used his Martian powers to fight crime. In short, he was suspiciously similar to a certain visitor from Krypton, and he was a hit. We used to get a lot of mail on that," says Martian Manhunter's editor Jack Schiff, and the character helped pave the way for a new generation of superheroes that was waiting in the wings. Mark Waid expanded upon this in a 1988 editorial for the Secret Origins comic book magazine. Many comic book historians consider John Jones to be the first superhero of the Silver Age of comics, having debuted several months before The Flash was revived in the pages of Showcase, and the age of the superheroes began once more in earnest. John's premiere adventure, The Strange Experiment of Dr. Erdell, written by Joe Samachson and illustrated by Joe Certa, showed a scientist named Erdell inadvertently bringing John to Earth, then dying of a heart attack brought on by the shock of meeting extraterrestrial life. Though John had a number of superpowers natural to all Martians, the ability to travel through space unaided was not one of them. The Martian, trapped on Earth, had to fend for himself. Using the power of atomic transmutation, John assumed the form of a native called John Jones and joined the local police force as a detective. Howard Chaykin, writer-artist. American Flag, Black Kiss, Hawkgirl, JLA Classified, Twilight.
I talked to you yesterday, and you mentioned that you were a comic book fan from early on, dating back to the 1950s. That's right?
Oh, absolutely. I come out of the Silver Age. I mean, I discovered comics when I was 4, but what really kicked into stride was with the Julie Schwartz stuff. All of Julie's books. I'd read all the Superman and Batman stuff out front, of course, but when Julie came along and started doing, the Flash, Green Lantern, the Atom, all that stuff, Hawkman, that stuff just killed me. I really loved that work. When I became a Golden Age collector years later, finding out the precedence of those things, it deepened and enriched my feelings for that work enormously.
Now, I also understand, too, you were reading Detective Comics with John Jones at the time, correct?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, when I became a Golden Age collector, among my primary goals was to develop extended runs of Detective. The Batman stuff that was in Detective Comics in the 40s and early 50s was some of the best material that Dick Sprang had ever done, before he became really abstract and lost. And back then, there was a backup feature called Airwave, which was one of the funniest, silliest comic books ever. When I discovered John Jones' Manhunter from Mars, I thought there was something kind of oddly, I hate to use the word meta about it, but it seemed to be aware of how odd it was, both in the drawing style and in the writing. I tried really hard not to pronounce his Martian name as Jones, but it seemed a mountain I couldn't climb, if you will. It had to be Johns or something, but no, it was Jones.
I tend to agree with you. When you read a lot of that stuff in a run, you realize that these guys were doing the job, and they were just kind of knocking it out every month, but they were seeming to have fun with it as well. So it wasn't as self-serious as some of the books were, especially these days.
Well, I think in those days, most of these, you have to remember that the guys who were doing comic books back in those days were the children of the Depression. One of the things that my generation didn't really realize until we reached a certain age was the storm those cats lived through. I mean, the 1930s, the hand-to-mouth existence of that, and then just when things begin to seem to be getting better, the Second World War begins. So you're talking, literally 14, 15 years of a complete storm. The silence and low-keyness of the 1950s, that kind of generation of silence, that solidity, is utterly justified and understandable. And that doesn't really start changing until the early 60s. But that 50s stuff, I loved it. It was just crazy stuff. For me, it always makes me think of summer. And in those days, it wasn't comic book stores, it was candy stores and drug stores. The combination of penny candy and a comic book was just what it defined my childhood in so many ways, but so deeply and so profoundly.
Did you enjoy the strip more when they were doing the weird detective-type stories before they got into the more superhero-type stuff?
I really dug the Weird Detective, along with Roy Raymond TV Detective as well, by Ruben Moreira. That stuff was just wacky.
Will Jacobs and Gerard Jones wrote in their book, The Comic Book Heroes, From the Silver Age to the Present. Even as the science fiction rage was helping revitalize the work of Julius Schwartz and Mort Weisinger, it was producing more mixed results from the third prominent DC stable, that of Jack Schiff. Schiff was responsible for editing a wide range of comics, including the 3 titles featuring DC's second most popular hero, Batman, Detective Comics, and World's Finest Comics. After 1957, DC management imposed the dictate that the comic editor should turn everything into science fiction. But in the case of the Schiff titles, the loosest possible definition of science fiction was imposed, and his stories were forced to toss up a ceaseless parade of dinosaurs, monsters, and aliens, both bizarre and comical. While Batman struggled along, 3 other old costumed crime fighters in the Schiff stable were afflicted with problems, not quite so outrageous, but also, unfortunately, not as interesting. Green Arrow and Aquaman were the first comic creations of Mort Weisinger. The Martian Manhunter was a product of 1950 science fiction, but all 3, until 1962, were only backup series in other hero comics. The youngest and best of the 3 was the Martian Manhunter, a character that writer Joe Samachson had developed with Weisinger in 1955, when they were trying to find contemporary twists on mystery stories for Detective Comics. Accidentally brought to Earth by a scientist, John Jones was a big green beetle-browed humanoid with the ability to shift shape. Soon he was limited to one secret identity, that of police detective John Jones, and to battling thugs with an array of Superman-like powers, Martian strength, Martian breath, Martian vision, and others in the same vein, plus the ability to elongate his body. The regular creative team on the strip were writer Jack Miller and artist Joe Certa. Although not exhibiting any great artistic flair, they imbued John Jones with a colorful charm that made the stories a delight to peruse. Howard Chaykin.
You spoke a little bit about the creative team yesterday. Did you actually have any insights on the creative team?
Not at all. I mean, I became a professional, doing work under my own name in 71 or so. And by that time, those guys were long gone. And I met all the guys who lived, but those guys were gone.
Will Jacobs and Gerard Jones wrote, John Jones, unlike other heroes of his time, had no boy sidekick, but after 7 years he was joined by a semi-intelligent, interdimensional pet named Zook in Detective Comics number 311, cover dated January 1963. With his cartoonish face, super pliable orange body, highly sensitive antenna, and baby talk, Zook brought a lighter and more fanciful element into the Manhunter's adventures. This element became dominant when the pair traded their backup spot in Detective Comics for a short-lived role in House of Mystery, beginning with House of Mystery number 143, June 1964 and after. The secret identity of John Jones was abandoned as the two spent their time battling the creations of the magical idol head of Diabolu, including such odd dreamlike images as an orchestra of living musical instruments and a hole cut out of the sky as if it was a wooden dome, leading to a world above the stars.
See, for me, the strip takes an uptick in joy when Zook shows up, and there's a lot of people who just can't handle the little...
I'm afraid I'm with those people. I hated that.
Just too far the other way, huh?
Clearly, this was not the House of Idea. It was dumb. I mean, even for me, as a self-serious 11-year-old, it was just too much to bear. Doug Batmite, and I love Mr. Mixies-Patelic.
I guess it's
bad, huh?
No, not bad.
I became a Marvel guy officially. I mean, I read all this stuff, and I discovered them. I guess Spider-Man 3 had come out. So by that time, I sort of lost my taste for a lot of the DC stuff.
Peter David, writer of stuff including Supergirl, Young Justice, Aquaman, DC vs. Marvel, and Justice League Task Force.
How familiar were you with John Jones before you scripted the character?
Oh, well, very familiar. I mean, you have to understand that I grew up hooked into DC characters. Marvel came later. My first exposure was to DC characters. Superman, Batman, Martian Manhunter. I've been following the characters for a very long time.
Were there any particular stories involving that character that you read as a child that you enjoyed?
None really leap out at me. Most of my Martian Manhunter experience was when I read about him in JLA. I didn't really read that many independent Martian Manhunter stories aside from his origin.
Les Daniels wrote, after his great success introducing revamped versions of The Flash and Green Lantern in Showcase, editor Julius Schwartz determined to bring back another feature from All-American, DC's sister company of the 1940s. In addition to Showcase, we had a magazine called The Brave and the Bold, he says, on which we decided to use the same procedure. So this minor comic book became a tryout title, and in its 28th issue, March 1960, it introduced a powerhouse team called the Justice League of America. The earlier group had been the Justice Society of America, which Schwartz thought sounded somehow uppity. The new name suggested sports, with all the notions of democracy and fair play that this implied. It caught on, and Justice League of America was launched in October-November 1960. Members of the Justice League were good sports without a doubt, cheerfully cooperative, and often so crowded together in their adventures that they had little room for temperament or even personalities. They also showed their egalitarian tendencies by giving the backseat to big boys Batman and Superman. The most active members were newcomers Flash, Green Lantern, and Martian Manhunter John Jones, together with diehards Wonder Woman and Aquaman. The last three weren't characters Schwartz normally edited, but playing in the Justice League boosted their careers, while Batman and Superman were still top attractions under the firm control of their respective editors, Jack Schiff and Mort Weisinger. Superman and Batman began to assert their authority, and some of the original members were unceremoniously pushed aside. No matter who was in the lineup, Justice League was a hit. It solidified once and for all the importance of superhero groups, and in the process provided a playground where DC's characters could attract new fans while entertaining established admirers. And by integrating so many separate superstars into a single package, it introduced the idea of brand loyalty to comic book readers.
The Justice League of America.
Mark Waid, writer, editor, Justice League, A Midsummer's Nightmare, JLA Year One, Justice League Task Force, Kingdom Come, The Silver Age.
These sales figures books, because they exist up at DC, and there's these great ledgers with sales figures and sell-through and stuff. Justice League is another good example of a runaway hit. That if you look at the other books that DC was publishing in the early 1960s, everything was doing pretty well. I mean, a good sell-through is 35-40%. A good print run is 400,000 or 500,000 copies, maybe, depending upon the book. Justice League #1 had a print run of nearly 1 million copies and had a 99% sell-through. It was a phenomenal success by any standards. And, if anybody has any lingering doubts as to whether Julie Schwartz really did truly have the magic as an editor to turn stuff into gold, that's, there it is right there.
The 1960s were the best of times and the worst of times for John Jones. As a founding member of the Justice League of America, Martian Manhunter served as a surrogate for Superman in the team's earliest adventures, and maintained a high profile with the team for its first several years of operation. This led to the Martian Manhunter co-starring in the first team-up title produced by DC Comics, Brave and the Bold, in which he was joined by Green Arrow. The Martian Manhunter was already receiving international attention through foreign reprints, and though he was left out of the 1967 Justice League of America cartoon, he did show up on a good deal of the merchandising related to the show, including boxes of Super Candy and Toy, Hasbro's various Justice League board games, Fleer's bubblegum and temporary tattoo packages, and Hasbro's JLA color by number set, and an oil painting by number set. Probably the oldest piece of Martian Manhunter merchandise was from Topps' 1966 comic book Foley's gum card set, a cardboard strip with dual bifurcated images that would allow you to dress up the Martian Manhunter in various fashions. As Mark Waid wrote in 1988, under the editorship of Jack Schiff, John Jones, Manhunter from Mars, fought crime in the back pages of Detective Comics for nearly 10 years, using his powers in secret and keeping his Martian identity from his friends on the Force. And though the Martian Manhunter was a powerful character possessing many powers that even Superman didn't have, he never achieved stardom, despite even his charter member status in the Justice League of America. Nevertheless, Schiff refused to give up on the character, and when Detective was handed to Julius Schwartz with issue number 327, Schiff took John to House of Mystery, beginning with issue number 143, June 1964, and gave it a new direction by having John jettison his human identity for good in order to take on the full-time tasks of defeating the Babylonian idolhead of Diabolu, then tracking down an international crime cartel called Vulture. Well, it was a nice idea, but it wasn't enough to turn the series into a true hit, and when House of Mystery changed format to become a horror anthology with number 174, the Manhunter was homeless for the first time. In his next appearance, in the May 1969 Justice League number 71, John left Earth, ostensibly for good, though he was seen again from time to time around the DC Universe over the next 15 years. Paul Kupperberg, DC Comics writer and editor.
I really don't remember a time when I didn't want to be a writer or didn't read comics. I've got buried, way deep in the back of an old filing cabinet, the comics I used to write and draw when I was 7, 8 years old, with characters like Martian Manhunter, The Atom, Daredevil, the Justice League, and a TV show I really loved called Rescue 8. I was reading Wonder Woman when I was 6 years old because I liked the Andrew and Esposito art. I devoured the Jack Schiff Batman stories, Martian Manhunter. This stuff was iconic and huge to me. MM was always my guilty pleasure DC character.
Oliver Queen, the vigilante of Star City, also known as Green Arrow.
John Jones, the Martian Manhunter, my old friend from the Justice League. We shared some serious times. I did wonder whether John and the others weren't humoring me sometimes. I never liked being called a hero. I just do what I think is right. I try to make a difference. John's a real hero. Manhunter, it was great being teamed with you. Earth lucky to have you on its side.
In 1985, Robert Greenberger wrote the following biographical entry for Martian Manhunter, which appeared in Superpowers number 1. This biographical entry reflected the revised history of Martian Manhunter, created in 1969 by Denny O'Neil, and was continued into the sporadic appearances of the character in the 1970s.
John Jones was a scientist of great renown on the nearby planet Mars. He was also an outspoken critic against the rising intolerance between the white and green-skinned Martian races. The arguments turned to civil war that divided the entire planet and lasted for years. John became a warrior and then a general, commanding troops against his sworn enemy, Commander Blanks. After a crushing defeat at the hand of Blanks, John was sent into exile in the wilderness for 13 years. The dejected scientist had just begun his exile when he was swept off the planet by an experiment from Earth. In time, the Martian Manhunter became an internationally famous crime fighter and was also a charter member of the Justice League of America. Years later, John finally returned home to Mars, only to discover that it had become a dying world. In his absence, the Civil War renewed and the entire planet had been decimated. With the JLA's help, John saved the few surviving green-skinned Martians. He defeated Blanks at last, and then placed the remaining Martians aboard a giant space ark that brought them to a world now called New Mars.
Howard Chaykin.
I always thought that there was a measure of self-awareness going on in John Jones that reflected an understanding of the inanity of the material. And of course, as comics have gone on, what you've got is material created by and for 15-year-old boys, slathered with an air of gravitas to make it palatable to the guys who are reading it at 15 at 50. So all of a sudden, John Jones has all this tragic backstory and all this other stuff. And back then, it was just some goofy
In 1992, Mark Waid wrote a text introduction to a reprint edition of Detective Comics number 225. The enduring heroes are the ones who are products of their time. Superman, protector of the weak and oppressed, was conceived during the Great Depression, when the American spirit was at its lowest ebb and people longed desperately to embrace a symbol of justice. Batman the Righteous Vigilante was birthed by the feelings of helplessness within the common folk, who were faced with the reality of urban crime when the Industrial Revolution created dark, crowded cities around them. The mid-1950s, by contrast, were a lighter time. As a nation, America had been tempered by victories in World War II and Korea. People throughout the country entertained a new prosperity, and a weird paranoid fear that someone was going to take it away from them. Senator Joe McCarthy had everyone believing that evil communists skulked around every corner, posing as normal Americans while threatening our moral fiber. Likewise, science fiction movie makers ran with that paranoia and used it to fuel films like Invasion of the Body Snatchers and I Married a Monster from Outer Space, which enforced a keep watching the skies mentality and personified the enemy enemy as an alien threat. The message was clear. Your life could easily be touched by aliens from that stellar infinity known redundantly as outer space. Why anyone could secretly be an alien. That nice new neighbor couple down the block. That remarkably clean-cut young man your daughter married just last week. Anyone. Little green men from Mars walked among us, undetected. They could be barbers, politicians, insurance salesmen, or in DC's case, a police detective.
Detective John Jones. I'm new to the force. Batman.
Don't bother. I know you're not human.
I suppose this changes things.
Not really. You're coming with me. I have some questions for you, Detective.
Humans. You act like you've never seen a shapeshifter before.
Who are you?
My name is John Jones. I'm a detective. Just like you, Bruce. I'm one of the good guys.
Why'd you run?
You might have exposed me. Turned me over to the authorities. I can't allow that. Not now.
I'm not sure what you are or where you come from, but my instincts tell me you're to be trusted. Make no mistake, though. I have a $70,000 sliver of radioactive meteor to stop the one from Metropolis. With you, all I need is a penny for a book of matches.
Ed Sample wrote about 1977's Justice League of America number 144 in an article for Amazing Heroes magazine number 79. Steve Englehart tackled his most ambitious Justice League story by revealing their true first meeting, an event which happened months before the events detailed in Justice League number 9, the heretofore recognized Justice League origin. The story, set in September 1959, was a product of extensive research both into the events in the real world of the time, as well as the events that occurred to all of the DC superheroes involved, based on the comics cover dated the same month and year. Englehart wove these events flawlessly. The story principally details the story of John Jones's arrival on Earth in 1955 and the immediate years thereafter. In February 1959, John, who had remained in his earthly guise due to the 50s UFO scare and the panicky atmosphere in general, is startled to see that Commander Blanks, his nemesis from Mars, has come to Earth to destroy him. The battle rages in their Martian identities, arousing the attention of the Flash, who attempts to stop them. The Martians disappear, and the Flash, recognizing the wave of panic spreading, contacts Superman, Batman, and Robin to help. Hearing what the heroes are up against, Roy Raymond, TV detective, puts out a nationwide call for assistance. The call is heeded, and the next day the four superheroes are joined by the Blackhawks, the Challengers of the Unknown, Plastic Man, the Vigilante, Robot Man, Congo Bill, Rex the Wonder Dog, Lois Lane, Jimmy Olsen, Aquaman, and Wonder Woman. Englehart's master plan was to use every hero who had a series in February 1959 and explained Green Arrow's absence due to his being on Starfish Island at the time in Adventure number 256. The assemblage splits into teams to track down UFO sightings. The first two groups do not find the Martians. Instead, their trails lead to Rip Hunter and his time machine, and Adam Strange Zeta beaming to Ryan. The last group, not surprisingly, comprised those heroes who would become the Justice League, run into test pilot Hal Jordan, who would not become Green Lantern for 7 more months in September 1959, showcase number 22, who had a run-in with the Martians at Cape Canaveral. Blanks plans to shoot John to his death in space aboard a booster rocket, but the heroes stop him. When they learn that John has been on Earth for some time, they persuade him to remain hidden until the situation quiets down, perhaps to reappear in 6 months or so. They also discuss forming a club, which they do the next time they meet. This is undoubtedly Steve Englehart's Justice League masterpiece.
Your first alien, I presume?
Steve Englehart, writer, Justice League of America.
You know, when DC asked me to come over and revamp all the characters in the Justice League, because DC had really fallen on hard times at that point, and asked me to come over from Marvel and redo all the Justice League characters, and I said, yeah, I'll do that, but I particularly want to write the Batman in and of himself because I just love the Batman. And they said, okay. And so, you know, that's how I got there. I had left Marvel and had decided to take a break from comics, and my wife, before she knew me, had traveled around Europe for a year, and I had never been to Europe, and I thought, well, that sounds like a cool thing to do. So we made arrangements, started making arrangements to just go travel in Europe, you know, take as much money as we could and go over there and stay as long as the money would last. That was the idea. And then DC called up and said, come do this thing. So I said to him at the beginning, I'm only, you know, I'll do this for a year, and then I'm going to go. You know, I can revamp those guys over the course of a year. I can write Batman, you know, for half a dozen issues before I go, blah, 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 and that'll get my Batman lust satiated. But then when I sat down to satiate that lust, I really wanted to do, like, the best Batman. I always wanted to do the best Captain America or the best whatever, Avengers, but I thought this was kind of a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I was a Marvel guy. I didn't expect to be writing Batman. If I was going to write him and it was going to be for a short amount of time, I was going to try to do the best thing I could. And if I may say, that was the same approach I took to the Justice League. Justice League has never really been reprinted, so a lot of people don't even know about the Justice League. But, in revamping all those characters, I wanted to do, like, the best Flash and the best Green Lantern and so forth that I could do.
In 1977, the Manhunter from Mars began appearing in his own tryout strip in the back of Adventure Comics, still written by Denny O'Neil. The majority of the attention paid to the strip was due to the dynamic art of Mike Nasser. Following this tryout, John Jones was set to receive a more long-term gig as part of a new major DC Comics expansion in their publishing line. Jeanette Kahn, publisher, DC Comics.
Beginning June 1st, the DC explosion, more pages, more stories, and the most exciting superheroes in comics. Watch for full details next month. When you started at DC, there was the DC explosion,
which led very swiftly to the DC implosion. I really saw comics as an art form. And when I came to DC, comics were considered this disposable, ephemeral medium for kids. And I thought we had to change a lot of the parameters so that comics would be given the respect that I felt they were due. And one of the things had to do with pricing, because comics, I think when I got to DC, were 15 cents maybe, or 25 cents, something very low. And they hadn't kept up with inflation, and that also added to its disposable quality. And so I thought, one of the things, if we could raise cover prices, that would be a start on the many, many kinds of changes that we had to do to get comics accepted as an art form. So I thought, all right, dollar comics, all this material. But the truth of the matter was the material wasn't very good. And it didn't justify the dollar price other than in page count, but not in terms of content. We really had to change the content over time and production values over time to justify what became the higher prices.
I am unharmed.
His solo project swallowed up by the DC implosion, the Alien Atlas returned to the guest star circuit. He fought Despero in a issue of Justice League of America and teamed up with Superman to battle Mongol in his first appearance in DC Comics Presents. Jim Starlin, writer-artist. DC Comics Presents The Weird. Cosmic Odyssey, Hardcore Station.
Well, I wanted to do a powerful Superman. They hadn't depowered him yet, so he was still up at that level.
Okay.
Julie Schwartz was the editor, and every issue, if you go back through, you still have, I had a different scripter on each one. So everyone was a different setup. Julie would say who was going to go in the book to team up with Superman.
Mm-hmm.
And then he would present me with the scripter of the month. So I basically, I was getting a different person to write with. And I learned very quickly that if you wanted to put something through, if you really wanted something like Superman meeting God, you didn't mention it to Julie, because Julie would probably say, no, we don't want to do this. We're going to get in trouble if we do this.
Even if you got the book down weeks ahead of time, or months ahead of time, if you turn it in, they have no time to change anything or question it. I had a great time working with Julie Schwartz. Julie was a great editor, but Julie was at the end of his career, and Julie got to be a little forgetful, and I caught on to this really quick. And when we were doing Superman, they kept giving me different writers to do the scripting. They didn't trust me to do the scripting, even though I'd been writing it. Other things, they said, well, this one you work with Marv Wolfman, this one here, Paul Levitz, this one here is Len. And when I got to Len, we were doing Superman Meets the Spectre, where Superman basically meets God at the end. So we didn't tell Julie any of this. And when I turned the thing into Len to write, it was too late for anything to change. And you go, Julie's going to Rick, he's going to kill us. I'm going, don't worry about it, just write it, find it. And Julie, when we turned it in, I made a point of coming in with him, because Glenn was losing it. He was so afraid we were both going to get fired. And Julie looked at it, read it over, and he goes, meet Scott. We talked about this? No. And one of the others ended, he was going, no. And it went fine, no trouble out of it and that. So I learned very quickly that if you keep it late, you can get away with it. It's harder to do now.
At that point, Superman, the only thing was kryptonite, which every Tom, Dick, and Harry seemed to be able to get a hold of.
Right. Of course.
But, it wasn't the kind of thing that, we were pushing them too far, I thought. I just thought it was something new that I wanted to do and see what we could do with it.
It was also a kind of a fun experience because I always thought that they had never really tried to push the science fiction part of Superman all that much, and, which they hadn't, aside from the Legion of Superheroes going into the future and stuff like that. There was very little space stuff going on with Superman. It was the rare story where he got sort of science fiction-y, and usually, it was for one issue and then back to it. I wanted to do more of a grand epic, and I think I've succeeded fairly well at it. It keeps coming back into print, so must have done something right on it. And plus, Mongel's still around. Even though DC won't let me use Mongel anymore, he's a Green Lantern character.
Alan Moore, writer of such comics as Batman the Killing Joke, From Hell, The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, Marvel Man, Watchmen, and the Superman story, Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow.
When Dick Giordano had acquired the Charlton line, Dave Gibbons and I were talking about doing something together. One of the first ideas was that perhaps we should do a Challengers of the Unknown miniseries, and somewhere I've got a rough penciled cover for a Martian Manhunter miniseries, but I think it was the usual thing. Other people were developing projects regarding those characters, so DC didn't want us to use them.
Dave Gibbons, comic book artist and writer, best known for his work on Watchmen, Green Lantern, and the Superman story for The Man Who Has Everything. Real audio is followed by a text-to-audio excerpt.
Another story that you guys did before Watchmen, if my timeline is correct, was that Superman annual for The Man Who Has Everything?
Yes, it is. And in fact, the two things, Watchmen and that Superman annual, were very closely linked. What happened was, Alan and I had been trying to get something going for DC Comics for a while. I was already working for them, drawing Green Lantern, and Alan at that point wasn't working for them. And I quite enjoyed the material I was doing for DC, but I really wanted to do some work with Alan, and we put forward some proposals for things that didn't ever come to anything because they'd already been promised to somebody else.
Martian Manhunter was the second, a dark tale of small-town, Cold War-style paranoia. Basically, there were rumors and scares about an alien having crash-landed that the local authorities were investigating. Their chief investigator was Detective John Jones, newly arrived from out of state. Of course, only he and we knew it was Mars he'd really arrived from. Alan wrote an outline and I did a few moody sketches. Before Manhunter from Mars we had come up with a sprawling DC multiverse-wide mystery epic featuring the Challengers of the Unknown. I didn't even get as far as sketches before we were told that, yes, Challengers had been promised to someone else. Nobody at DC had even read these proposals, but, on seeing Alan's work in 2000 AD and Warrior eventually offered Alan Swamp Thing, I worked out my notice on Green Lantern and then the stars were perfectly aligned for Watchmen.
And when I heard that he was doing this proposal for the Charlton characters, I thought, that's something I'd really like to draw. And it so happened that a couple of days later I was going to go to a convention in Chicago as DC's guest. So at one of the parties there, I went up to Dick Giordano and said, Dick, this thing that Alan's working on, I'd really like to draw that. And Dick said, well, how does Alan feel about that? I said, yeah, he'd really like me to do it. He said, okay, fine, that's yours. So that was Watchmen. And I was really thrilled at that. And I then bumped into, literally a minute or two later, I bumped into Julie Schwartz. And he said to me, so Dave, when are you going to draw me some Superman? And I said, well, anytime you like, Julie. Who's going to be writing it? And he said, Alan. He said, anybody you want. And I said, well, how about Alan Moore? He went, yeah, fine, fix it up. So I did go to bed a very happy man that day. And in fact, on the day that Alan and I got together back in England to sort of start the groundwork on Watchmen, we also talked about that Superman story at the very same time, and that was that was what we were working on while we were doing the long-term planning for Watchmen.
Alan Moore later revisited John Jones in his infamous unrealized proposal, dubbed Twilight of the Superheroes. The project was intended to be his follow-up to Watchmen, but a dispute with DC Comics over his contract to that work prevented Twilight from ever coming into existence. In the story, the Manhunter from Mars plays a pivotal role in a war between houses of superheroes, which resembled a Game of Thrones for the Long John set. The proposal has circulated throughout the industry and inspired a number of later works, with Alex Ross and Mark Waid's Kingdom Come likely bearing the closest resemblance. The Manhunter from Mars was unavailable to Moore and Gibbons because he had already been committed twice over. Writer Greg Potter had been developing a miniseries called Jim, Son of Mars, in which John Jones's nephew was intended to serve as a messianic savior to the Martian people, fighting corruption and religious fanaticism on the planet that had been dubbed Mars 2. However, when the 12-issue maxi series finally debuted, it was as Jim, Son of Saturn, which employed the same basic setup as the stories from the Martian Manhunter's Bronze Age, but changed all the names and removed any actual presence from John Jones. As it happened, the Alien Atlas was actually earmarked to return to the book where he had seen his greatest success and visibility, when a genetically engineered warlord, the Marshal of the Sons of the Red Brotherhood, doctored evidence and trumped up an excuse to invade Earth, which was convincing enough to see John Jones's then-lover, Jin, turn against her man and hunt him as a traitor back to Earth. It was up to the sleuth from outer space to protect his once-adoptive home from the Earth-Mars War. In 1987, Greg Gildersleeve wrote for Amazing Heroes number 114. By 1984, it was not only permissible but fashionable to revamp, recreate, and regurgitate, in some cases, super teams. So it was with pride and fanfare that DC announced that the JLA would soon be supplanted by a new JLA. Writer Jerry Conway and editor Alan Gold preceded their new JLA with a three-part story in issues 228 through 230, in which the JLA could not effectively defend Earth from a Martian invasion, allegedly because the team's mightiest members, Superman, Wonder Woman, Flash, and Green Lantern, were unavailable. The JLA won only with the help of ex-member John Jones. When the dust settled in JLA Annual Number 2, Aquaman, the only original member present, disbanded the Justice League and announced the formation of a new one, admonishing the other members to give the League your full allegiance or give it nothing. Only the Elongated Man, Zatanna, and Jones remained with the Sea King. They set up headquarters in a bunker in Detroit. The JLA satellite had been destroyed in the invasion, and soon inducted 4 new members, all Conway Patton creations: Vixen, Steel, Vibe, and Gypsy. Volumes have been written, mainly by JLA letter writers, as to why Aquaman could not or should not have done what he did. Many fans suggest that although the new team was good, it wasn't the JLA. Others vehemently protested the new members, particularly Vibe and Gypsy, as being racial stereotypes, unoriginal, and even ridiculous. But Gold and his crew defended the new JLA, contending that a team of second stringers, as opposed to a team of superstars behaving like second stringers, would succeed if the fans gave it a chance. For a while, it almost worked. Conway wrote fairly entertaining stories and developed an interesting cast, while Patton's artwork remained top-notch. But things began to go wrong when the creative team started to defend their actions within the stories. The quality began to decline noticeably during 1985's convoluted Crisis on Infinite Earths crossover, and more changes saw Aquaman ousted in favor of Batman, and the team leaving Detroit and returning to their original Secret Sanctuary headquarters. Of course, first Patton, then Gold, and finally Conway had left, leaving editor Andrew Helfer, writer J.M. DeMatteis, and artist Luke McDonald to handle the death throes of one of the most important books of DC's Silver Age history. Amid the birth pangs of a new Superman, a new Wonder Woman, and a completely restructured DC universe, DC announced that the Justice League of America would be no more. To end it all, DC gave the fans who despised the new JLA what they apparently wanted, seeing the 4 new members done away with in the last 4 issues, number 258 through 261. Steel and Vibe were killed, while Vixen and Gypsy apparently retired from the hero biz. All things considered, it was an ignoble demise for the book that first brought together the old DC universe back in 1960.
Arthur Curry, Aquaman, King of the Seven Seas.
During the Earth-Mars War, the League fought at half strength, and it was only through the aid of John Jones that the Martian attack was eventually turned back. He's the very heart and soul of the League.
Jerry Conway, writer, Justice League of America.
The truth is that the Justice League sales had been softening for several years, and at the same time, Teen Titans was doing really, really well. And people were always saying, why can't the Justice League, people at the offices were saying, why can't the Justice League sell as well as Teen Titans? And my feeling at the time was that the reason that Titans was working and was successful was because Marv had those characters to himself. So maybe what I need to do is change this grouping, and make it characters who are only going to appear in Justice League and who are going to have emotionally involving stories that just can only be told here in this book. And my thought at that time was, well, let's go the exact opposite of what we've been doing, which is these kind of cosmic stories involve the League defending the Earth from alien invasions and spectacular interdimensional warfare, and let's get it down to the ground level. Let's make this down to earth. And it gave me the opportunity to bring in characters that I had created in other, that were part of the DC implosion, like Vixen and Steel, and redefine the book to be more real world oriented, at least theoretically.
The stakes were raised to a degree at the same time that we brought the stakes down to earth, by taking it away from, the satellite, making the stories less earth shaking, shall we say, but they became more personal, which is something that I wanted to do. And as you say, there was a vulnerability, to these characters that wasn't there with characters who had other ongoing titles. You knew that every month there was going to be another Flash comic, so the odds were that there was nothing terrible was going to happen to the Flash in JLA, but Vibe existed only in the JLA, so anything was possible.
In a 2012 interview for Back Issue Magazine number 58, Jerry Conway discussed Aquaman's departure from the Detroit-era Justice League to rekindle his marriage with Mira, and the promotion of Martian Manhunter to team leader. I felt that both Aquaman and Martian Manhunter were both underused characters. They both had been, at one point in my reading as a kid, superhero fan, a couple of my favorite characters. In the case of Martian Manhunter, not as he was developed over the years as this bold Superman clone, but in his original conception, in the first couple of stories that had appeared in the 1950s, he was clearly this strange alien presence from another world whose ethos and mindset was different from ours, and that could be kind of challenging. The idea of being a telepath was something I wanted to play around with. How does that work in terms of your relationships with people if you know what they are thinking and feeling? How do you interact with them? That was intriguing to me. Michael Browning noted in the article, and at the end of JLA number 250, May 1986, we get our first glimpse of the newly reborn Despero the Destroyer. Jerry Conway said that Luke McDonnell did a great job making Despero look incredible. That, I think, is one of my main contributions to the Justice League, bringing Despero up to speed. He was one of the first JLA villains, and I always felt like he should be more like Dr. Doom, somebody you were scared of if you knew he was on the horizon. I felt it was an opportunity to do a multi-issue storyline that mattered.
It's always interesting to me what people remember fondly. I mean, I think people who are fans of JLA who had been reading it for a number of years, they came into it and it was like, what are you doing to my book? So it was not well received by the readers who had been passionate about the book up to that point. To the readers who had never read the book or who were less passionate, it was probably more successful.
I don't think it worked out, but I don't think that it was because the idea itself was a bad one. Probably the execution, wasn't up to snuff, and that probably had more to do with the fact that I was working on far too many projects, to really give it the kind of storytelling strength that it deserved. I've been writing the book for 10 years, so I was probably burned out.
Well, I mean, the book didn't go as well as I'd liked it to have gone, and I take some blame for that. But I also think that editorially we were not given the support that the book got when Keith took it over. Keith was able to come in, and it was like a fresh wind blowing. For me, it was like the old wind trying to blow, from a different direction, and I don't think they really felt like I could do it. So they weren't. I don't think they were as supportive. I mean, they certainly didn't give me the editor that I could have used.
J.M. DeMatteis, scripter, Justice League of America, Justice League International, Justice League Europe, the 1988 Martian Manhunter miniseries, Justice League Quarterly. You took over JLA with issue 255. You scripted under the pseudonym Michael Ellis. Coming onto the book, did you already know it was getting canceled?
Yeah. Jerry Conway had left the book, and Andy Helfer, who I have to say is one of the best editors to sit behind a desk at any comic book company, anywhere, at any time, asked me to come on and finish off whatever story Jerry was doing and then finish off the run. I got my directive, kill some characters. And so those who think I set out to kill Vibe or whatever, no, it was basically a directive to knock off some, to really shake it up and really end that Justice League to clear the deck for whatever they were doing next. And when I was writing that, I didn't know I was going to be one of the guys doing it next. I had no clue. I was just there to write that. I got to finish that off, and it was a fun run. We had a good time with it.
Did Helfer ask you specifically take out this character?
I can't swear to it because it's been a long time. My feeling is that I think it was you can knock off this one or knock off that one, leave that one alone, and whatever. But it's been so long. Maybe Andy would say, no, I didn't say that. It was your idea. So I don't know, but I know that they wanted to kill some of them off.
Andy Helfer stated in a 2012 interview for Back Issue Magazine number 58, "I think I got DC to give me 5 issues or so to wrap it up. I decided early on to at least throw the idea of killing them all out to the writer to see how it was received. I think Jerry bowed out there, and unlike with Atari Force, I couldn't really blame him. So I called my old buddy Mark DeMatteis to help me wrap it up. He did, and he convinced me not to kill them all, only the really bad ones. I wasn't expecting Mark to have anything to do with the new Justice League." Issue 266 was your first full issue of Justice League on your own. That first issue had Martian Manhunter on the cover. You invented a grandmother for the character, and you invented the Martian god of life and fire. Did you feel like you were already investing in the Martian Manhunter character at that early point, or was it just figuring out what to do now that you were on the book?
You know, that's another case of, now I can tell you, Martian Manhunter is one of my favorite characters, one of my absolute favorite DC characters, certainly. I love writing him. And before I wrote the character, I never gave him a second thought. And sometimes, as soon as you start writing, something opens up and you connect in a way that you never knew you could. And that's what happened with that character. And so coming up with a little bit of the Martian mythology and all that was just a natural outflow. And in the course of writing that, I really came to connect with the character. And I later did a whole Martian Manhunter miniseries that went into his whole backstory and what really happened on Mars. And that's another character that I would go back to in a heartbeat. Love that character. I would write him again anytime.
Here in this first issue, you invented, is it Ronmir? Is that how you pronounce it?
Ronmir, yeah.
And you brought him back for the miniseries. Did you just have that tucked away at some corner of your mind to revisit at some point?
I don't know whether I consciously thought, I'll go revisit this someday, but since I had a chance to really explore him and I knew I had set that up, that it seemed like a perfect thing to take it to the next step, when we actually got to meet and interact with that Martian god.
Ultimate evil, dark mind, and past, destroyed of villains, spread chaos and destruction. But now they face Earth's mightiest heroes. The superpowered collection explodes into battle. Oh no, parademons with the Flash out on the limb, Superman's powers crippled by kryptonite, and a power-action kick to boot.
You say him? Who said that?
It's Green Arrow, Dr. Fate, and Martian Manhunter, part of Kenner's superpowered collection.
Superman?
Figures with power actions each sold separately.
Now, Lord Darkseid. Now, Calabash.
How will Superman foil Darkseid's 30D? You decide.
Jerry Conway was the primary writer to employ the Martian Manhunter from the late 70s through to the mid-80s. The Alien Atlas was prominently featured in Justice League of America number 200, an extra-sized all-star artist jam that is still to this day considered by many to be the greatest Justice League story of all time. And his return to the team during War of the Worlds 1984 was well promoted by house ads. While the reception to the Detroit League was lukewarm, John Jones's increased visibility in this time period was hugely important to the character. It likely contributed to his inclusion in the very popular Kenner toy line Superpowers collection. The action figure was packaged with a mini-comic that could arguably be considered the first Martian Manhunter solo book, and the Sleuth from Outer Space's first animated appearance ever was in a commercial for the Superpowers collection. The Martian Manhunter figured into ancillary merchandise related to superpowers, things like Grenadier, pewter figurines used for role-playing and such. John Jones appeared in the Superpowers miniseries comic book tie-in and was essentially the official representative of the Detroit Justice League to the major event maxi series Crisis on Infinite Earths, where he was treated as among the upper echelon of DC superheroes in raw power and respect. The Martian Manhunter was among a select few powerhouses to join in the mission that severely damaged the Anti-Monitor and cost Supergirl her life. And then later, the Martian Manhunter was at the forefront of confronting a confederation of villains that had formed and attempted to capitalize on the chaos wrought by the Anti-Monitor, a giant entity that was destroying whole dimensions within the DC universe. The combination of all these vectors in the period from 1984 to 1986 turned the Martian Manhunter from a largely forgotten also-ran from the early Silver Age of comics into one of the most notable and visible heroes in the DC universe, coming out of their resurgence in the mid-'80s following Crisis on Infinite Earths.
Why, Martian Manhunter, you look as nervous as a hermit crab.
Nonsense. It's just important that we make a good impression.
Relax, my friend. Just go with the flow. And no more cookies. You know what they do to you.
Gentlemen, I'm John Jones. Welcome to Justice League International Headquarters.
Justice League International? You said it was the other Justice League. The good one.
Well, please make yourselves at home.
Andy Mangels wrote in a 1987 article for Amazing Heroes number 116, with the debut of the 1986 DC series Legends, within which the new JLA seemed to be squashed by a building in number 2, the smell of death permeated the air. In a grand 4-issue finale called The End of the Justice League of America, fans witnessed the strangulation of Vibe, the return of Gypsy to Leave It to Beaverland, the melting of Steel, and the farewells of Vixen as she headed for the Suicide Squad. The Martian Manhunter officially broke up the JLA forever. After 261 issues of their own title, 2 annuals, and numerous other appearances, the JLA was really gone. Summoned by Dr. Fate to the pages of Legends, the Martian Manhunter decided to join with several other heroes in a Brotherhood of Justice. Thus, in Legends number 6, a new Justice League was formed, sans the Of America title. This group, comprising Batman, Martian Manhunter, Guy Green Lantern Gardner, Black Canary, Captain Marvel, Blue Beetle, and Dr. Fate, intended to become international, and possibly more than that. In January of 1987, the first issue of the Justice League appeared, plotted by Keith Giffen, dialogued by J.M. DeMatteis, penciled by Kevin McGuire, and inked by Terry Austin. The aforementioned 7 members appeared, as well as new recruits Dr. Light, Mr. Miracle, and Oberon. The lighthearted first issue established each of the characters' personalities, as well as setting up a subplot involving a Maxwell Lord IV, who somehow seemed to be behind the forming of the new Justice League. The public is not sure how to view the new Justice League. The members do not see eye to eye on anything, and Maxwell Lord remains an enigma. J.M. DeMatteis.
We were given a list of characters that we could basically use. You know, we couldn't have the big guns. I think Keith and Andy were the ones that finally, based on what they were told they could use, that came up with the first roster of characters. They were told right off the bat, you can't have any of the big guns. They gave us Batman, and that was about it. You know, there was no Superman, there was no Wonder Woman, there was no... We eventually got Wally West in there later, you know? So, but that was to our benefit, because by getting these, and I'll put it in quotes, second-string characters that people didn't really care about, we got to make them our own. And we got to play with them in a way they'd never let us play with Superman. We could do anything we wanted with Blue Beetle and Booster Gold and Fire and Ice and these other characters. And so we got to make them their own. And as a result of that, all these years later, those characters are still hugely popular and have a life of their own. And we're happy that we have Beetle and Booster and Fire and Ice back in Justice League 3001 that we're doing now.
Bruce Wayne, The Dark Knight Detective, Batman.
John can handle it. John Jones has been in this game longer than I have. He's the only member of this team I feel I don't have to nursemaid. He has a fine tactical mind. He's been with the Justice League since the beginning, and he understands group dynamics better than anyone I've ever met. Sometimes forget your talent for speaking in enigmas, John. Life is what it is, John, and what it is hell. And sometimes it's far worse than that. You've handled more than most.
Ted Kord, Blue Beetle. God, he gets more like Batman every day. From Andy Mangel's 1987 interview with Keith Giffen, Martian Manhunter is the connection to the old league. He's been in every JL incarnation, so he's got a sense of history. I also want to play up the fact that he's a Martian. He's not human, so he doesn't have a human being's approach to things. He's also the mediator of the group. He's seen it all and been through it all with the JLA. It's his place to fit in. He feels more comfortable with the Justice League than he would walking around on the street. J.M. DeMatteis. When Batman left the book, Manhunter's role seemed to be elevated, and he seemed to become the straight man. Yeah. Was that just natural evolution?
Absolutely natural. You know, I mean, now Batman was a straight man as well, but he was so straight that I knew that Batman was having a good time. Underneath all his growly stuff, I knew that he got a kick out of these guys because he needed that lightness in his life. But we could never really push it too far. Once in a while he would say something and Beetle would go, wait, did he just make a joke? Did Batman make a joke, you know? With John, it was more on the surface, you know? He was exasperated, but he was delighted. And we knew that both things were true, and he would lose his mind, and I've got to go to my room and meditate and eat a cookie for a while, you know?
By Hieronymus, I need a cookie.
He was such a great character, and he was the perfect straight man for that team.
Andy Mangels wrote, the 1987 annual number 1 will feature art by Elemental's creator Bill Willingham. Giffen noted, this will be our Gardner-Fox type of issue. They'll be splitting up into teams and coming back together to defeat the menace at the end. It will really spotlight John Jones, the Martian Manhunter. The Justice League will be fighting a sentient cell. It's a fast-moving contagion. This will owe much more to the Andromeda strain than any other superhero villain battle. It's got a little science fiction and a little bit of horror. I'm sure it will look great by Willingham. J.M. DeMatteis. In the first Justice League annual, it seemed like that was a much more overt setup for the Martian Manhunter miniseries. Was that something that you were already planning because you'd created the sentient virus and at the end it was contained within John Jones? Did you know that you were going to come back to that story at the time?
I don't think that I knew that I was going to come back to it, but I think it might have been what inspired me and gave me the idea that this is a great door in to explore the character. You know, Keith put that in the plot, and I don't think when I was scripting that issue, I was thinking, I'll use this as a way to launch this miniseries. But as it went along, it became a perfect vehicle to have him in this state. I mean, what a sacrifice he made to take that thing inside him, and then how do you live with this virus? And that's a great door into the character's psyches, and I'm always looking for new doors into the characters' heads, and that was a perfect one. But I don't think when we were doing that story, I thought, I'll use this for the miniseries. But when it was over, it was like, that's a great way to explore this character.
One of the things I like about the character is that despite being extraordinarily powerful, he's also so extraordinarily vulnerable. So you have that duality you talked about, these great extremes.
Right. And he's not someone, a lot of these powerful characters are like, I am the powerful character, and that's not his personality at all. He's really a very gentle guy, very soft and very sweet, even though he puts on this exterior because you have to keep Beetle and Booster in line, So, and that's what I like about him. He may be the single most powerful character of all the DC superheroes. When you think about everything he can do almost anything, He doesn't need the Justice League. He can do it all himself, But he has a sweetness to him as well, which is one of the things I connected with in the character.
During the Millennium crossover, was anybody trying to draw Martian Manhunter into that whole Manhunter cult action, or are you all able to steer clear of that and just give him Rocket Red instead?
I'll give you the completely honest answer. I don't remember anything about it.
In JLI number 22, you wrote a line, it was during the Invasion story arc, and Wonder Woman was guest starring, they were destroying kind spaceships. Wonder Woman expressed her dismay at all the death and destruction that was happening. And John Jones says, why must we always take such pleasure in the combat, in the fighting? Were you trying to contrast the warrior incarnation of Martian Manhunter versus the character that was going to come out at the end of that miniseries, the more introspective character?
Again, that wasn't a conscious thing, but that comment is true to that character. And it's also really true to superhero stories in general. That one little comment is a big comment on the whole genre because it's true.
In the 1997 expanded edition of the comic book Heroes, Gerard Jones wrote, "What else could you do after a year like 1986 except chuckle and play and bask in the afterglow? Andy Helfer, Keith Giffen, and J.M. DeMatteis were doing it. Their new Justice League wasn't about Dark Knight passion or Watchmen ingenuity. It was just about hanging out and having fun. They popped in whatever characters you wanted to play with, regardless of popularity. Giffen was great with the pacing. DeMatteis was good with the banter. Kevin McGuire, the penciler working over Giffen's layouts, handled the characters with humor and photographic clarity. Al Gordon's ink softened the stiffer lines gorgeously. All put together, it was the most simply endearing comic book to come out of the mainstream in a long, long time." Giffen said the JL was about being with your co-workers. The hero's antics were a little too insane for a work atmosphere, though. This was more about being with your buddies in the most entertaining high school ever, or being with your fellow fans at a never-ending convention where no one's too shy to act up. It was the answer to Alan Moore's question, how do you follow Watchmen? Obviously by accepting the fact that superheroes can't go any further into art or realism, that they're just absurd fictional people we'd like to hang around on a pizza night to see who falls in love with who and to laugh at their pratfalls. The menaces they face might be seriously threatening. Giffen and company were smart about that in the early going, never letting the humor become the self-parody that fans always distrust. But nothing could feel so momentous as Guy Gardner getting bonked on the head and turning into a grinning sap who sings Carpenter songs. Justice League was the affirmation of the Society of Fandom, a home for the lonely and a salve for the wounds of Watchmen. It was an immediate, gigantic hit in the direct market. DeMatteis spun 180 degrees away from Justice League, deep into mournful character exploration in a spin-off miniseries, Martian Manhunter, 1988. Mark Badger's art was still ambitious beyond the reach of his craft, but it showed a cartoon visionary in the making. Unfortunately, the fanboys hated it. After the exhausting artistic challenges of 86, they wanted clarity and lightness. Older and more demanding fans were sensing that the artistic potential of superheroes had been exhausted, while the fans who still liked superheroes wanted them to be simply fun again. Michael Urey wrote the blurb for the Amazing Heroes Preview Special 1988 edition. Martian Manhunter totally restructures the character's origin, roots, background, and persona. We've reworked everything, DeMatteis asserts. The Martian Manhunter is a character that intrigues me because nothing has ever been done with him. I don't think one iota of his potential has been tapped. DeMatteis examines the psyche of the Martian Manhunter in the miniseries, exploring what goes on in his mind and how, from his alien background, he perceives life and superheroics on Earth. A new villain, the Death God, is introduced to plague the hero, and the JLI guest stars. DeMatteis, artist Mark Badger, and editor Andy Helfer are also concocting a new origin for the hero, as they delve into his Martian heritage, taking the Manhunter back to his homeworld. According to the author, as with many characters in the post-crisis DC universe, most of the Martian Manhunter's previous stories are no longer valid in the current continuity. DeMatteis includes that everything you've ever read about John Jones' life on Mars is not true. By the way, John Jones is not even his real name. The comic book magazine Who's Who Update 88, Volume 2 clarified justify the changes made to Martian Manhunter. Dr. Saul Erdel was a middle-aged scientist who grew up reading science fiction and, in the late 1950s, succeeded in constructing a machine meant to teleport alien life forms to Earth. Unbeknownst to Erdel, the machine's beams traveled backward through time as well as space, and, after numerous failures, Erdel one night brought to his laboratory a diseased, green-skinned Martian, the last member of a race that had succumbed to a fatal plague. Erdel nursed him back to health and offered to send him home, but the Martian, still half insane with grief, destroyed the teleportation machine. Erdel still cared for the alien, and since their healing time together had formed a telepathic bond between them, the scientists fabricated an entire life and history for the Martian. Christened by Erdel John Jones, and programmed into him in order to help him forget the trauma of his past and cope with life on Earth, even suggesting John's slope-browed form, which was more human-looking and less threatening. Once Jones's grief abated, Erdel let his friend think him dead and left his life. Recently, Jones was confronted by Mir, the Martian god of death, who awakened in him his true memories. During their conflict, Jones was reunited with Dr. Erdel. J.M.D. Mateus.
I really enjoyed working on that miniseries. I enjoyed playing with the character and playing with his psychology. I think my favorite thing that I did, which they undid, I think, after that, was the idea that his whole sensitivity to fire was completely psychological. It had nothing to do with anything physiological. I thought that was a great door into the character. It was because of the trauma on Mars when his family died and he had to cremate them. And so he had this sensitivity to the whole idea of fire.
In later years, they made it more of a telepathic issue. Mir was redesigned from when he was created versus when Mark Badger did the miniseries. Did you give him any instruction on that, or did he just decide he wanted to visualize that character in a different manner? And is that an actual being, or is that a manifestation of John's fever dream?
I think it's both. I think it was a fever dream on one level, but this was a god of Mars, which means he manifested through the fever dream. And Mark Badger is another guy that I've worked on a lot of projects with over the years, and I really have tremendous respect for him. He has such a unique visual style. For him to redesign these characters was fine with me. That was the redesign was probably his, I'm sure. And then I came up with the idea in my story that even the Martian Manhunter's form that we knew was not his real form. That when he came to Earth, he had to find a way to fit in if he was going to be in public, so he gave humans what they thought they would expect from a Martian. And then Mark designed this wonderfully weird Martian form that I was just rewatching one of the Justice League Unlimited cartoons, which they've used in the cartoons, and it's become part of his mythology now that form was his original form, which is great.
John.
Maria.
Welcome home, my love. I've missed you, my husband, and so have the children.
Father! Father!
My dear children.
Are you staying home this time, Father?
What was the motivation behind so radically changing Martian Manhunter's origins?
The 80s was a time where they wanted reinvention. They wanted things to be fresh and new. But again, you don't change something just to change it. You change it because it's an outgrowth of the character. And I just thought, well, let's think about this character. Let's think about it. For one thing I played with was the fact that he couldn't have possibly have come from Mars now and come from a civilization because we know too much about Mars now. So the idea that he was pulled through time as well as space, the idea that he had assumed, as we talked about, this body to help him get around, if he's going to be a superhero and he's going to be known as a Martian, well, let me look like something familiar from a 50s movie, which is what he looked like. He was a 1950s character. So all these things, on all these changes, the idea that Dr. Erdel was the one that programmed him and put these memories in there to help him survive. To me, it's always about what's going to be interesting for the character. What's going to explain these little pockets in the character's history that maybe seem a little off, and how will that make it a richer and more psychologically interesting character? So that was my approach with him, and he's such a rich character, you know. And I know that John Ostrander went on and did lots of really fascinating things with him.
Were Ray Bradbury's The Martian Chronicles or Richard Matheson's I Am Legend influential in writing of that series?
I'm one of the world's biggest Bradbury fans. I worship at the altar of Ray Bradbury. I mean, there are a couple of writers I love as much. There's nobody I love more, and I can't think of another writer who has inspired me more than I read a Bradbury book and I want to go write immediately because he just sets my soul on fire. I'm sure it wasn't on some unconscious way. If you're writing about Mars, certainly the poetry of that story, and that story was very poetic, probably came, but I write poetically anyway, but one of the reasons I write poetically probably is because I read Bradbury. But that's why when I got to the end, because I had done this poetic story about Mars, I had to dedicate that story to him because he really is, in my literary pantheon, the god of gods in there. You know, love his work, and I return to it again and again and reread it, and it always inspires me.
Was I Am Legend in any way an influence, though? Because it seemed like you got a sole survivor, a plague-ridden planet. He introduced his wife and daughter in that story, so not at all?
Not at all. At that point, I hadn't read. I've never read I Am Legend. I like Matheson, and I'm a big Twilight Zone fan, so I love Matheson for that reason. I've read some of his novels and things, but I'd never read I Am Legend. I don't think I'd ever seen any movie version, so if anything that's similar is completely coincidental.
Did you enjoy Mark Verheiden's Secret Origin story? Because it seemed like a lot of people's favorite Martian Manhunter stories is The Man I Never Was from one of the Justice League annuals, and you seem to pick up from where they left off with the Secret Origins and play out how changed the Martian Manhunter character was.
The Mark Verheiden story?
Yeah.
I never read it.
Really? Because the Man I Never Was picks up from the cop character who's introduced there, and Manhunter's trying to investigate his death.
Oh, that's it. See, here's the thing when Keith and I work together. Mm-hmm. Keith creates the plot. Mm-hmm. I then, write all this stuff on top of that. So I had no clue. To this day, you've just enlightened me. I had no clue. I could 99% positive I had no clue that story was based on anything that came before.
Well, part of the point of the story is it's not about a murder mystery. It's about Martian Manhunter having progressed past being a superhero at this point.
Right. And I probably thought it was referencing something from some old story from 15, 20 years before, And I remember really liking that story because that's the fun of my collaboration with Keith. He lays down this really amazing, solid plot, and then he gives me the room to sometimes write a whole other story on top of that. So I really got to play with the character and his psychology in there, and I had no idea it was referencing another story, so thank you for enlightening me.
Orion, other dimensional god of New Genesis.
Martian, I have come to respect you.
Nathaniel Adam, a.k.a. Captain Adam.
I can't figure him out. He seems so cold, and yet I can't help feeling that underneath it all he's enjoying some very private joke.
Scott Free, the new god, Mr. Miracle.
The Manhunter's a complicated guy. I've given up on trying to understand it. I just relax and enjoy him.
The success of the 1987 Justice League series spawned numerous spin-offs and tie-in miniseries, including Justice League America, Justice League Europe, Justice League International Quarterly, various solo series featuring team members, and routine appearances by the JLI in miniseries such as The Weird and Cosmic Odyssey. Jim Starlin, writer-artist.
Cosmic Odyssey, what made you come up with that?
DC had a book called Book of Magic, and in it, I can't remember who did it, but somebody mapped out their mystic universe of the DC universe. And they came to me and said, I think it was Neil Gaiman, and they wanted to do the same thing with their science fiction character. And I started working on it, and the whole idea of mapping out the DC science fiction universe didn't really have a lot of appeal to me, so I sort of forgot about that and did this story. Whatever they liked it, and then they got like 2 issues into it before they realized that I hadn't mapped out anything. And they said, you screwed us. What are we going to do with this book here? I said, well, you might as well finish it. It's hands on. They said, okay. And then they just dumped it out there, and they said, we really messed us around on this one. This thing's going to just come and go. We'll get rid of it. I've been getting royalties on that book for 25 years.
What's the book they go?
Mike did that crazy one panel where this big machine that's been painted yellow. For some reason, he drew Andy Helfer in the background with a paintbrush. And he had painted the thing yellow. Mike was just fun.
Mike McCone, artist of Justice League United, Justice League International, and Justice League Quarterly. You spent much of your early career drawing Martian Manhunter in various Justice League projects. Did you have fun with that?
I did. It was my first professional work. So I was 19 years old, loved comics, totally unjaded, which is kind of the opposite of how I am now. So yeah, I enjoyed it a lot. Even though I wasn't a DC fan, I was a Marvel fan. But DC were paying me, so...
That being the case, did you have any prior experience with the Justice League as a reader?
No, none at all. I don't think I'd even read a Justice League comic outside of the Kevin Maguire, Mark DeMatteis Justice League. But I was reading that for the creators, not for the characters. I was totally unfamiliar with them.
Did you enjoy drawing the Martian Manhunter specifically?
I've got to say, I enjoy the character, but I don't really enjoy drawing him because I don't think I draw him very well.
I would definitely disagree. You're actually one of my favorite Martian Manhunter artists.
Well, I appreciate it. It's very kind of you to say so, but he was just one of those characters that I never felt like I was able to just kind of key into who he was. The Blue Beetle, I knew immediately how I thought he should look. Batman, characters like that, but some characters just don't seem to work for me. And that's generally no reflection on how they do look when I draw them. It's just how it feels to me. And I don't think I got them right, really, until I drew Justice League United last year.
And your take on the character has evolved quite a bit because he was a really big, muscular character when you first started doing him, and now he looks a bit more sleek. There's more of a sci-fi feel to him in the newer work.
Yeah, I think that was when I was drawing the book initially, 25 years ago. I was a big Alan Davis fan, and he used to draw these just incredibly large shoulders on characters and with these ridiculously thin waists, and I think I was going after that a little bit, but I've slimmed him down quite a bit, as I have with Superman too. I don't really like drawing them too bulkily anymore.
Yeah, I remember you had a really massive Superman back in the day as well.
It was utterly ludicrous. I don't know why I drew him that large. So hopefully with hindsight, and a little more experience, I do it a little better now.
Stuart Eminem, artist, on his first professional assignment for DC Comics on Showcase.
The Martian Manhunter was a fun character over in JLA. I just tried to pick a character I thought I could do well.
Mark Waid wrote in 1988 Secret Origins number 32, when the decision was made to retell the origin of the original Justice League of America, first shown in JLA number 9, 1962, certain publishing realities affected the story. Most important, in DC's post-crisis universe, Wonder Woman didn't make her heroic debut until long after her former comrades Aquaman, Martian Manhunter, Flash, and Green Lantern. Plotter Keith Giffen and editor Mark Waid briefly discussed the idea of simply leaving a female member out of the original JLA, but eventually dismissed the idea. Not only was the League never really a boys' club, but there was something more substantive and, oh gosh, just more leaguish about a 5-member team, which is how Black Canary ended up being the 5th mystery member of the Justice League of America. Peter David.
Your first mainstream work at DC inside the core continuity was Secret Origins for the Justice League of America. How did you come to write that? Because my understanding is the original creative team was going to be the same as the 1989 Aquaman series, with Bob Fleming doing the script and Kurt Swan doing the art.
Okay, you're asking me to cast my mind back 30 years. As I recall, I didn't write that. I scripted over an existing story. And I guess what happened is that the assigned writer simply either didn't have the time or flaked out or whatever, and they asked me to write it, and I said, okay, sure. But I really didn't think about anything much beyond that. I mean, I'd love to tell you there's some sexy story behind that, but there's really not. It was like, hey, Peter, we have this book. Can you script it? Okay, sure. That's it. The whole story.
Given that you were already building a reputation as a comedy writer, and you had Justice League International going at that time, I just read the script again last night. It was quite funny. Did anybody ever approach you about maybe taking over that book once Giffen and Matisse were leaving? Because you seem like a perfect fit.
That's a great question. No.
J.M. DeMatteis.
Was there any initiative to try to bring in classic Justice League villains? Because you guys touched on Starro, Professor Ivo, Queen Bee, Despero. And I know that there was a tendency to discard a lot of the Silver Age characters at that point in time. Did you guys make a point to try to bring them in and reevaluate them and come up with a new way of approaching them during your run?
I don't know if it was again, I keep giving the same answer. I don't know if it was a conscious decision any more than Keith going, hey, let's bring back Despero. And people seem to love that Despero story.
As it happened previously with Jerry Conway, the classic JLA villain Despero appeared late in this run, and his cosmic threat was considerably more impressive than anyone else a neophyte League had faced up to that point. Unlike with the Jerry Conway story, however, this time Despero had a body count, as well as a spotlight battle against the Martian Manhunter. For a handful of issues in the funny superhero book, things got very real.
And the joke of that story is because it was, for us, as grim as Justice League story as we've ever done. When I was writing that one, I was sort of like, half of my brain was writing it seriously, and half of my brain was satirizing the grim and gritty characters, stories of the day, including my own Kraven's Last Hunt. Because if you read Despero's captions, it's very much, I am Despero, I am death, I am fire. It's just like, I am Kraven, I am... So I was kind of goofing on myself a little bit, but people loved that story. And we also had, if I recall, that was an Adam Hughes story, right?
Right.
Adam Hughes did a beautiful job with that story. We were very lucky. We had some great artists on that book, and Adam was one of the best.
Yeah, I caught that satire, but Hughes was so good at realizing it that it would be easy for somebody to miss that element of it.
Yeah, and then again, we got that nice Martian Manhunter moment at the end where he used that whatever name we gave to it.
The Mayavana.
Thank you. To allow Despero to think he'd won. And again, this great sacrifice because it was only something he could do once in his lifetime. So again, just like the thing with the virus, wow, the more we talk about him, what a great character. I have to write him again. DC, if you're out there, I need to write that character again.
Well, you mentioned, too, you were trying to dial down the grim and gritty. Ultimately, that story is about the gift of love, solving all the problems.
Yeah, very, very much so. Very much so. And that element was right there in the plot. I got to do what I do, which is weave it into the Martian mythology and everything. Yeah.
Now, at the same time, though, that story took away Gypsy's happy ending where she goes back with her parents and goes back to school, and then by the end of that story, she's in a whole different place. But it seemed like you got some more mileage out of Gypsy. How did you feel about that character once you revisited her, since you had her pop up quite a bit after that?
Yeah, now, a lot of those choices were Keith's choices, because I'd get the plot and go, oh, look, I guess Gypsy's here, And then it was always my job to go, okay, let's find a way into her head. Let's see how we can deepen her and expand her. And that story allowed us to do that.
Did you ever have to talk Keith out of killing anybody?
No, I never tried to talk Keith out. I don't think I've ever had to say, Keith, don't do that. Well, maybe once in a while we're on the phone and we're discussing ideas, and I don't know if that's going to work or not. But here's the amazing thing about Keith, and I said this on the panel the other day. He is one of the single most creative humans I've ever known. In any medium, not just in comics, anywhere, anyhow. And you talk about talking to him about changing things. So the story that to me defines Keith is years ago we were in the hall at DC and we were going to do a story for Secret Origins, the secret origin of Nort, who I love beyond reason. And he tells me the story. Well, it's going to be like this and this and this and this and this and this and da-da-da-da-da. What do you think? I said, Keith, I don't really like that story. I don't think it works. And he took a breath for about 5 seconds and he went, well, how about this? It's this and that. And a whole new story came out of his head. He is so creative. I always joke, there's like when my kids were little, they had these bubble bears. And you pressed the plastic bear's belly and the head popped up and out came all these bubbles. And that's Keith. You squeeze his belly and out come a bunch of ideas. You don't like those ideas? Squeeze his belly again in 5 minutes and some more ideas will come out. He's brilliant. We've been working together for more than 25 years now, and I enjoy it as much more now than I did then.
Did you ever have plans to revisit Saul Ardell? He never popped up again after the Martian Man miniseries.
I did a story, and I think it was supposed to run in... Remember, we had Justice League International Quarterly. It was a gigantic book. It was like 80 pages 4 times a year. I did a story that, for whatever reason, never saw print, and it was a Martian Manhunter solo story, and it had to do... It's a great story. Maybe I'll get to rewrite it. He encounters a woman that he becomes convinced is the human woman who's the reincarnation of his Martian wife. But if I'm remembering correctly, Dr. Ardell, I've never said it out loud before. Maybe you're right. Maybe it's Ardell. It sounds better that way. Was in that story. I know he was in that story. But I think what might have happened is we were working on that toward the end of our run, and it was in the drawer to go into Justice League Quarterly, and it just never saw print. There was another story I did, was a Guy Gardner General Glory story. Trevor Von Eden drew it. It was a really fun story, and I don't think it ever saw print. So there's a couple of stories that may be still up in drawers at DC.
It seemed like Justice League Quarterly tried to radically reinvent itself when you guys left the book.
And maybe that's why those stories never saw print, because I remember them both, and that Martian Man, it's because I love that character so much, and it was a really fascinating story to have him obsessed with this woman who didn't know him, and he was convinced that she was the reincarnation of his wife.
I'm happy to have talked to you just so that I could find out that nugget. I've never heard that anywhere else. One of the major through lines of your run on JLI was the redemption of Max Lord. And then, of course, a number of years later, he was turned into an outright villain, murderous, all that kind of good stuff. Are you just crestfallen when something like that happens, when you spend 5 years of your life developing the Max Lord character, showing him go from being a creep to a good person, and then they just turn around and undo it all?
I have 2 answers to that, and they're contradictory. One is absolutely, because you're invested in that character, and the character means something to you, and then you see something like that happen, and you go, oh, God, what did they do? Why did they do that, And then you take a deep breath, and you realize it's comics. I've done the same thing. Somebody else has done something with a character, and I come along, and I reinvent it, and I change it. So after, the first couple of days of going, oh, my, I can't... And then you take a deep breath, and you let it go, and you realize our stories are all still out there. That Maxwell Lord is still out there. And one of the great things about what we're doing with Justice League 3000 and 3001 is we're in the universe that you last saw at the end of I Can't Believe It's Not the Justice League. Anything that happened between then did not happen in the universe we're in. When we talk about Max Lord in that book, it's the Max Lord that we all knew and loved, and he was a good guy, and he never shot Blue Beetle, and they all lived happily ever after. You know what I mean? So In the end, it all worked out, didn't it?
It's a great book to go back and read because you've got Max still there, Sue and Ralph Dibny are still together. It's one of those books I like to read as a palate cleanser when I'm tired of all the darkness, just to revisit those characters again.
And people always point out that there's some throwaway line I had in one issue where they said, we better get back there or Max is going to shoot me in the head or something like that, Little knowing that that's exactly what would happen years later.
JLA Annual number 5, the Armageddon 2001 Annual. Was that your ideal ending for JLI where you got to look at where those characters would be in, I think it was 15 years at that point in time, and see where they ended up?
At the time it was just another story and just another issue. So I wasn't thinking like, this is a great grand finale story for them, because we were still pretty much in the middle of our run at that time, I think.
Well, you were juggling War of the Gods, Armageddon 2001, Breakdowns. I can't remember all the crossovers you were having to deal with at that point in time.
Yeah. Breakdowns was one. That was one. That was the last big thing we did. And if there was any one story that maybe I think Keith and I would both go, we're sorry that we did that one. It was just one of those giant crossovers that went on too long. Luckily, we got to take a breath after that and do a real final issue, and Kevin came back for that, and it was great.
It happened to be 62. Were you all just trying to reach that magical 5-year point?
I honestly don't remember. We had decided at some point, and maybe it was in the middle of Breakdowns, where we both said, I think we're done. We've done a lot of really great work on this book, and we've gone as far as we could go. And little did we know that 10 years later we'd be back to revisit those characters and revisit them again, and now here we are again in Justice League 3001 with Beetle and Booster and Fire and Ice and revisiting them again. When we were done with that book, we really thought we were done. I never thought I'd necessarily even work with Keith again. Not because there was any negative anything, but I was by that point, I think, under contract to Marvel again, and he was doing other things. And then we came back together to do I Can't Believe It's Not the Justice League. No, formerly known as the Justice League, with Kevin. And it was the first time that the three of us kind of went, oh my God, what we do together is good. We weren't thinking about it then because we were on a treadmill. We had so much material we were cranking out. It was like, here's the plot, write the script, turn it in, on to the next plot. So when we got back together after whatever it was, 9 or 10 years, that was when we went, this is great. We have something unique here that we don't have when we collaborate with anybody else. We have to keep doing this. But we were so stupid, we didn't know that we had it in the first place.
One of my favorite images of the Martian Manhunter is that 3-panel shot by Kevin McGuire from number 60, where he's flying off into the horizon, says just goodbye. Was your intention for him to just go away for a while? Let him work out? Because, for about 1.5 years, 2 years into the series, you kept having him say, I'm not your big green Martian martinet. I need some time to process all this information. And that's when he finally took it. And then immediately, 1 year later, he's back as Bloodwind.
Right. Well, I think at that point, it was a natural outgrowth for the character. It made sense. Now, I don't know also if whoever was taking over after that requested that he not be on the team. I don't know. I don't remember what the behind-the-scenes machinations were, but it was a proper ending for him at that point in time. Yeah.
Copy from Internal Correspondence Special Number 4, DC Comics 1992, Martian Manhunter, American Secrets. This 3-issue prestige format series is a revitalization of DC's first Silver Age superhero. Set in 1960, Martian Manhunter, American Secrets explores a secret chapter in the life of the Martian Manhunter that deals with the end of the Golden Age and the birth of the current DC pantheon. Operating as police detective John Jones, the Manhunter stumbles upon a mystery during a routine investigation that involves the flying saucer scare of the 50s, the beginnings of the Cuban Missile Crisis, quiz show scandals, rock and roll payola, and a web of murder and mystery. Our hero must penetrate mob echelons in Las Vegas and Havana, as well as the CIA, as he discovers that aliens, mobsters, and communists may be scheming towards mysterious ends. Martian Manhunter American Secrets deals with the darker elements of the paranoid 50s and a vast intergalactic mystery, even managing to recap the origin of the Martian Manhunter. Alan Scott and Jay Garrick, the original Green Lantern and Flash, who are retired when this story takes place, can be seen in cameo appearances in their civilian identities, as can several soon-to-be stars of the DC Universe. The art is by Eduardo Barreto of Batman, Master of the Future, the unauthorized biography of Lex Luthor, and The Shadow Strikes, with a script by his Shadow collaborator, Gerard Jones, writer of Justice League Europe and Green Lantern. In my opinion, American Secrets is disputably one of the greatest stories ever told with the Martian Marvel. The tale's sophistication and dark undercurrent could have easily qualified it for Vertigo status had not the title arrived a bit prior to that line's launch and outside its goth scope. Gerard Jones' setting of late 50s, early 60s America remains fairly unique for modern comics, arriving after the McCarthy period and before the McCartney one. This period is underrepresented and fascinating in comics form, though I shed no tears for having missed it firsthand. From Internal Correspondence Special Number 4, a new lineup, new members, and an exciting new direction for Justice League America begins with issue number 61, following the Breakdowns mega series. Superman is now the JLA leader, and the team includes Guy Gardner, Fire, Ice, Blue Beetle, and Booster Gold, as they meet the Weapons Master, who is hired to steal Guy Gardner's power ring. This 2-issue story, in which the Weapons Master succeeds in trapping the JLA in an extra-dimensional warp field, will see 2 new members join Justice League America. From the Superman titles comes Warrior Queen Maxima, while Bloodwind is a new mystical character with a mystery-shrouded past. Future issues include a crossover with Superman, the truth behind the Bloodwind mystery, and the return of Monarch from the pages of Armageddon. Dan Jurgens, writer-artist, Justice League America, Superman.
I've always been of the mind that we needed to loosen up from the restrictive bounds of continuity a little bit. And, if I go back to the 80s, people used to ask me, well, Dan, what do you think of what Keith Giffen is doing with Booster Gold in Justice League? I mean, do you like it? Do you hate it? Do you want to kill Giffen? What do you want to do? And my basic answer was always this, and that is, I looked at the Justice League books as taking place on Earth Giffen. And it's not to say that they were contradictory to DC continuity or anything else, but they were firmly entrenched in a corner of the universe in which they had their own flavor.
From an article by Philip Schweier in a 2012 issue of Back Issue, number 58. In 1992, DC opted for a more straightforward approach and split the current team into 2 versions, Justice League Europe led by Green Lantern and Justice League America led by Superman. Of course, it only made sense for the latter team's writer to be well-versed in writing The Man of Steel. The writer of this incarnation was Dan Jurgens, who was offered his first opportunity to write in the mid-1980s by Jerry Conway. Like Conway, Jurgens' Justice League was privileged to feature a character he had created, Booster Gold. It was great getting back to the character, says Jurgens. For example, during my run on Superman, I had Booster guest star a couple of times over maybe a 10-year period. During this time, Jurgens was also writing and drawing Superman, offering him the opportunity to cross over both titles. We started to plan the little thing called The Death of Superman, and I thought, you know what? I can work the Justice League into this. I get along with that writer fairly well, and I think it helped create a more DC Universe-wide type of event. We brought in the Justice League, and I think it helped add to the overall atmosphere of the story. That changed a lot of things in terms of how we were working and how we were doing things. The pure simple fact is that writing and drawing 2 books a month is almost impossible. I don't know that many guys capable of writing and drawing 1 book a month, much less trying to keep up with 2. Jurgens departed the book as of Justice League number 77, Blood Secrets Part 2, July 1993. He culminated his run by revealing Bloodwind to be longtime Justice League ally the Martian Manhunter. I thought it was a great way to create a sense of mystery and misdirection, to create the character of Bloodwind and at the same time keep the Martian Manhunter in my back pocket as something I can introduce later.
All right, I got a random off-the-wall question for you. What was the deal with Bloodwind? As a reader, it sort of felt like his story never really finished or got explained, or maybe it got derailed. What was your vision for that character, and did it in fact get derailed? Did it change, or was it just we didn't read it close enough?
No, I think it's more fair to say that if you go back to that time, it was a time that turned from a reasonable, practical working schedule into absolute chaos, and that is because of the death of Superman. Mm-hmm. So as you look at prior to the death of Superman, I'm writing and drawing Justice League, and I'm writing and drawing Superman, and all of a sudden the death of Superman hits, and everything changes. And it changed for everybody who was working on the books at that time, and the demands of that kind of started to cut more and more into Justice League, and ultimately that's why Justice League had to go for me, where I ended up on the book for a shorter run than I had anticipated. And it really was that the entire Superman experience became so pervasive and so unique at that time that it was really hard for all of us to focus on other projects for a while. And it was, part of what even happened when we decided to do The Death of Superman, we didn't know how we were going to bring him back or when for sure or exactly how it was going to work. And all of a sudden, when the whole world is looking at you, that meant more and more concentration and effort had to go into making sure that worked. And ultimately, by virtue of that, I think the time I had to work on Justice League got cut back more and more. And I probably should have left the book earlier than I did, but ultimately it meant, yes, I had to wind up the Bloodwind story and kind of get out of that and move on sooner than I had planned to.
Had he always intended to be Martian Manhunter?
There was always the intention that it be Martian Manhunter, but to resolve itself in a different way.
Okay.
And part of that, I think, if you look back at that now, it does feel, I think, somewhat rushed and shoehorned a little bit. And there was going to be, the mystery was actually going to play out longer, which I think would have been cool. I think some of the best mysteries in comics, you play them out as long as you can until the fans are ready to just go after you with knives and claws, right? And we didn't get to do that in that instance, and it had everything to do with what was going on in the other book.
Kids WB will be right back. Yup, after these messages. And we hope that you'll be back too.
Director Fury, the internet is besieged with lame, lifeless podcasts.
What we need is a hard-charging, foul-mouthed band of brothers with chemistry, big brains on comics, and personality. Personality goes a long way. What we need is the Marvel Superheroes Podcast.
I'm a legal machine. Diabolu Frank.
And I am Mr. Fix-It.
The Marvel Superheroes have arrived! Nick, internet radio is saved!
Get this podcast off iTunes.
The Marvel Superheroes Podcast can also be found on Shout Engine, the Internet Archive, and on Rolled Spine Podcasts blogs.
A very happy 60th from all of us at Kids WB.
Obviously, the people who create comic books want you to read the things. Comic books aren't meant to be precious. They're pop art. They're junk culture. But they're our culture. If you're listening to this podcast, it's your culture. Most people, when they talk about comic books, they're talking about the so-called Big Two, Marvel Comics and DC Comics. It strikes us, though, that the entire comic book industry is undervalued by the general public. As comic aficionados, we'd like to have a podcast out there that covers the entire rest of the industry, and for that purpose, we will be your underguides.
If you're sitting around and you find yourself about comic books all the time and how comic books suck and how back in your day comic books were good, take a listen to the underguides and you'll maybe open up a little doorway to some independent comic books that you hadn't read before. It doesn't have Spider-Man in it, or a Wolverine, or a Green Lantern in it, but it talks about people's lives and stuff that sometimes you can identify with. If you're wondering where all the good writers and stuff went that don't write your comic books anymore, they're making independent stuff, so maybe we may cover it, and you may find something you can go check out.
Stay tuned for more Kids WB.
It's an old joke. Frank doesn't pronounce it thesaurus. He pronounces it thesaurus.
Thesaurus?
And when I asked him what the is a thesaurus, he's like, I don't believe in saying it thesaurus. It sounds like a dinosaur.
Three friends.
Come, my baby.
The world is not right.
The movie Two Planets comes out.
Too many topics.
Please sign my Galvatron.
It's just so much been there, done that.
Super cookie cutter hip hop with it.
One podcast.
The lead singer of Nickelback doesn't have demons.
He gave away his heart.
Zero given.
How sad is it that Axl Rose didn't kill himself for OD?
Django.
Where did the plastic stop and the human flesh start?
Oh no. Tanya, you're close. We're about to kick you out of the podcast.
The Rolled Spine Podcast.
It's just so well done.
I claim your TV. This is an alien attack on Kids WB.
This concludes the Martian Manhunter 60th Anniversary Special, Part 1, 1955 through 1993. We leave our alien Atlas after he's departed from Justice League International and been separated from the mystical being Bloodwind. Join us for the rest of the celebration as we look at the highs of the JLA series drawn by Howard Porter.
I feel I have more freedom with the Martian Manhunter than the others, and he's just plain fun to draw because he is something different. The low-key character who is always around and willing to sacrifice himself for the sake of the team. He's strong. He's almost the soul of the team. I like the visuals of the Martian Manhunter, and I like his character the most. He's real mysterious, not overexposed. The big brow is cool. Real classic costume.
The Martian Manhunter solo series written by John Ostrander.
First and foremost, the concept of John Jones is that of duality. John is a manhunter, but he is also a philosopher. In Martian society that was expected, so duality is in John's culture and upbringing. So it comes as no surprise that there is a duality about him. He presents himself as a warrior, but he's also one of the gentler souls on the planet. He occasionally presents himself as human, but he's alien. He's this alien being, and at the very core he will always be alien. The Manhunter is odd because he's one of the oldest DC characters in terms of being around, yet he's one of the least defined of the DC characters. What I keep on hearing from the letters coming in is, "I'm so glad you're doing Martian Manhunter, he's always been my favorite." So there's been a lot of goodwill connected to John with this series so far. For a long time, John was treated as a green Superman and therefore not very compelling. John seems to be the heart and soul of the League in many ways. He has been important to holding the League together on more than one occasion, and at the same time, we've learned just how the League has been important to him. As the last of his race, the JLA is John's family, the people who he feels the most similarity to. He shares many similarities with Superman, being the last of his race, but at the same time, shares much in common with Wonder Woman and Aquaman, who have the same stranger in a strange land feel as John. Those that have known him the longest have a vast respect for him, while some of the younger heroes have to learn that there's hardly anyone more trustworthy in the League than John. Two facts are tied to the essence of the character for me. 1. He's an alien. Far more than Superman is an alien. John Jones is an alien. He comes with a different mindset, but he is also an observer of Earth customs. Through his eyes, the world can seem new to us. Watch a kid, such as a 6-year-old. Watch how they discover things that we take for granted. In the wonder in a child, we see things afresh. I'd like that be true of John. 2. He's a manhunter, a policeman. He's proactive rather than reactive. He goes after the bad guys rather than wait for them to come to him. It's inherent in the name.
Modern Martian Marvel writers such as Matt Kint.
Yeah, he's fun. You know, like a lot of writers say, like, oh, Superman's the hardest character to write because nothing can beat him and he's so powerful. I'm like, well, Martian Manhunter's even more hard to write because he's all of that, plus he has mind control and he can turn intangible. So, you know, like, so in a way, he's a little more, he's like Superman, but like a little more interesting because of his background. And then the mind control and the telepathy and that kind of thing helps me not only get into his character, but also like get into the other Justice League characters.
The Imaginary Story, DC The New Frontier by Darwin Cook.
The Martian Manhunter surprised me and turned out to be one of my favorite characters to write.
Further conversation with writer J. Mark DeMatteis.
As I sat writing, putting words, for the last time, into the mouths of Oberon and Max and Fire and Ice and Guy and my two personal favorites, John and Beetle, I felt a genuine sadness. No regrets. But I'm going to miss those guys.
The live-action Smallville John Jones actor Phil Morris.
On playing John Jones, I honor it. This has been a dream come true for me. I love working as the Martian Manhunter. I love that I have superpowers and that I can fly. In the DC universe, I'm second in power only to Superman. I was telling Whitney Rancic, our director, to keep me grounded. I know John Jones, and he's not prone to hyperbole. He's just real. He speaks to you like I'm speaking to you. I'm a fan of all the DC Universe characters, and Martian Manhunter, to me, it's weird to say this, but he's one of the most humane of all the DC Universe characters. That he's from Mars, but he has such a great sense of compassion, such a great sense of humanity. So yeah, I'm a big fan of Martian Manhunter.
And just as importantly, we will not discuss that thing Valerie D'Orazio said.
Martian Manhunter was known around the offices as a character that was sort of boring, but was a JLA staple, if you will, though we did try to jazz him up with that storyline where he was Scorch's love slave.
Or that really awful thing David Goyer said.
Martian Manhunter.
Oh, yeah. Ooh, that's a challenging one.
Overpowered. Overpowered.
How many people in the audience have heard of Martian Manhunter? No?
Who's a good audience?
He's overpowered.
How many people that raise their hands have ever been laid?
Yeah.
100% of the audience.
Well, he hasn't been rebooted, but he's a mainstay in the Justice League.
Is he gonna be rebooted?
I'm not saying...
He's gonna be booted.
Well, he's not rebooted.
Is he gonna be booted?
Well, he can't be called the Martian Manhunter because that's goofy. He could be called Manhunter.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of... they have those.
I rented that movie.
Yeah. I mean, the whole thing... Okay, the whole deal with Martian Manhunter is he's an alien living amongst us. That's the deal.
Is there another one of those in the DC universe?
Well, he came out in the 50s, and he had basically all the powers of Superman, except he didn't like fire,
right?
And he could read your mind.
Yeah,
and
he
ran,
could,
and
become.
So here's the best part. So he comes down to Earth and decides, unlike Superman, who already exists in the world now, that he's just going to be a homicide detective and pretend to be a human homicide guy.
But he's green.
Yeah. No, but he can change his shape.
Yeah, he makes himself look
so
like
instead of using superpowers and mind reading and I could figure out if the president's lying or who, whatever, he just decides to disguise himself as a human homicide detective. Dare to dream.
Yeah. That's pretty dismal.
I don't know. I would say I wouldn't call him Manhunter. I would set it like day after tomorrow, and like we discovered one of those Earth-like planets, with Kepler or something like that. And you know how they're talking about Scientific American, like DNA faxing, where they can basically break down DNA and then fax that information. So maybe
we send it there to that planet.
Well, no, we get the DNA code from that planet and then grow him in a petri dish here.
We grow a dude here to solve our crimes.
But he's like in Area 51 or something, and we're just
sitting there doing word searches and such.
Doing biopsies on him. And then he gets out and he's really angry.
Same Martian time, same Martian channel. Theme music Black Sheep Alien by Cyril G. Pereira from the album The Revenge of Glory 2007 with additional music from the album Diabolic 2012. Entre Montañas from the album Igua by Damos. Mark Wade, clip courtesy of Comic Zone Radio 2007. Paul Kupperberg, quote courtesy of the Aquaman Shrine 2007. Oliver Queen quotes courtesy of Green Arrow number 88, 1994, and The Brave and the Bold number 50, 1963. Steve Englehart clip courtesy of DollarBinComics.net 2014. Jeanette Kahn clip courtesy of Chicago Humanities Festival 2013. Jim Starlin courtesy of Sidebar 2008. Victor Rogers 2014, and The Gorgeous Geek 2010. Alan Moore quote courtesy of Comic Book Artist number 9 2000. Dave Gibbons courtesy of Word Balloon 2008 and Miller World 2015. Arthur Curry quote courtesy of Justice League of America number 239 and Martian Manhunter number 6. Jerry Conway courtesy of We Talk Comics 2014 and the Fire and Water Podcast 2009. Bruce Wayne courtesy of Justice number 3 2006. Detective Comics number 715 1997. Justice League number 6 1987. JLA number 2 1997 and Justice League America number 42 1990. Ted Cord quote courtesy of Justice League Quarterly number 1 1990. Orion quote courtesy of Justice League America number 50 1991. Nathaniel Adam and Scott Free courtesy of Justice League International number 8 1987. Stuart Emmerling quote courtesy of sequentialtart.com. Dan Jargon's clips courtesy of We Talk Comic and the Fire and Water Podcast episode 85 2014. Howard Porter quote courtesy of Wizards JLA Special 1998. John Ostrander quote courtesy of ComicContinuum.com. Matt Kent clip courtesy of Nerd Locker. Darwin Cook courtesy of Absolute DC, The New Frontier. J.M.D. Mateus quote courtesy of Justice League America number 60 1992. Phil Morris quote courtesy of Krypton Site 2007. Valerie DeRozzo quote courtesy of Occasional Superheroine. David S. Goyer clip courtesy of Script Notes episode 144, The Summer Superhero Spectacular 2014. Additional clips from the television and home video program, the ABC Sunday Night Movie 1962 through 1998, Justice League of America 1997, Justice League Unlimited 2001 through 2006, Smallville 2001 through 2011, The Batman 2004 through 2008, Justice League The New Frontier 2008, Justice League Crisis on Two Earths 2010, and Batman the Brave and the Bold 2008 through 2011. This is a not-for-profit hobby venture. No original content from this podcast is intended for commercial use. Any copyrighted materials featured in the podcast are believed covered under fair use. No rights infringement is intended.
You also had the Martian Manhunter appear in a rare solo guest appearance in Aquaman 28, where he helped the Aquaman to get onto the floating Atlantis planetoid thing.
That's right.
Was that another instance where Martian Manhunter was just a practical choice, or did you choose him for any other reason?
I don't remember.
So in Aquaman number 14, you had a Justice League team approach Aquaman after Thanatos impersonated him and started a war with the surface world. It was sort of a piecemeal team from various Justice League groupings, and one of the main ones was Martian Manhunter, who got the napalm hand from the actual Aquaman. I was just curious, did John Jones appear in that story for any reason other than because the fire weakness made him an easy target?
I have no recollection at all. I don't even remember writing the story until you just asked me. I mean, because, dude, that was, 25 years ago?
Right.
How much do you remember what you did Actually, you might remember a lot. But, I mean, I barely remember stuff that I wrote 25 days ago, much less a quarter of a century.